once again, and welcome to our 9th edition of the Signs of the Times. Last time we finished by saying we're going to look at the resource wars. But first I would like to read you a statement from a normal, average American who wrote a letter to the editor of his newspaper. And it's called Clear as Mud. And it starts off by saying, "Are you confused by what is going on in the Middle East? Let me explain. We support the Iraq government in the fight against Islamic State. We don't like ISIS, but ISIS is supported by Saudi Arabia, whom we do like. We don't like President Assad in Syria. We support the fight against him, but not ISIS, which is also fighting against him. We don't like Iran, but Iran supports the Iraqi government against ISIS. So some of our friends support our enemies, and some of our enemies are our friends, and some of our enemies are fighting against our other enemies, whom we want to lose. But we don't want our enemies who are fighting our enemies to win. If the people we want to defeat are defeated, they might be replaced by people we like even less. And all this was started by us invading a country to drive out terrorists who weren't actually there until we went in to drive them out. Do you understand now?" Well, that is a pretty accurate portrayal of what is going on in the Middle East at the moment. So what we're going to try and do is unravel some of this confusion. And one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to look at the resource wars, which are going on not just in the Middle East, but around the planet. Now, people are saying on a regular basis, people with so-called authority and people that think we must listen to their opinions, they're saying on a constant basis that the world is running out of resources, running out of oil, out of gas, out of water, and the economic growth is over, and we have to try and find prosperity without growth. What happens when an infinite growth economy runs into a finite planet, etc., etc. So the world is running out of resources. So this means that there is great competition for the resources which are left, which means that we're going to have resource wars and we're going to have a race for what's left. So here we have the ellipse again, where most of the oil and gas and other resources are located, and you'll notice that the war zone that we have at the moment is pretty much right in the middle of this ellipse. So the war is going on in this area partly, but not only, because of resources. Now, in Africa, that's the African flag, in case you don't know what the African flag looks like, and it's all over Africa, indicating that China is all over Africa. And they are. They are in Africa doing all sorts of projects, infrastructure building, and they're doing it for the purpose of extracting resources out of Africa. I witnessed this personally when I was in Uganda. I was traveling along a road, a very nice road, not finished, but it was all the way from the coast of Kenya right into the Congo. And the reason why the Chinese were building this road was because the Congo is full of wonderful resources, all sorts of things, valuable resources like things that they need for the technological age, minerals that are vital for keeping the technology going, etc., etc. China is actually trying to capture the mineral market. So, I mean, they're just commercial people wanting to promote, their own interests, which is basically what everybody does. But of course, other people are not happy that the Chinese are all over Africa. And the Chinese are not squeamish about supporting people, who need the money as long as they get their advantages. So China is very active in Africa. Now, this is why America has a military command all over the earth, because they want to keep control of everything in the earth. So I want to look at the US AFRICOM one just briefly. AFRICOM was the last of these US commands. It was established in 2007, and this man in the picture here, he made a revealing statement. He says, the purpose of AFRICOM is protecting the free flow of natural resources from Africa to the global market. And that's one of AFRICOM's guiding principles. So you see, he lets it, we're there to grab the resources. That's what we're there for. And this is what many countries are doing around the world at the moment. They are trying to get their hands on resources. China was very active in Sudan, and they had basically control over the oil there. They even owned some of the companies that were operating there. So what happens? Sudan gets divided in two. There are two countries now, and most of the oil is in the southern part of Sudan, the new Sudan, and China loses. Then in Libya, I don't know whether you know this, but Gaddafi was busy developing his country. He found huge sources of fresh water in the desert, and he was channeling this water to the coast, where he was using it for agriculture. You see those green circles there? There are fields that are being irrigated with this water. It was one of the greatest man-made rivers in the world, and the Chinese were helping them. There were at least $50 billion worth of investments that China had. But when Libya fell, China gets kicked out. The Chinese government had to organize a rescue effort for about almost 36,000 Chinese workers, engineers, etc., who were working in Libya. So China loses again. You see, not only do they kick out Gaddafi, they kick out China. So you see, there is lots of tension in the world today simply on this particular issue of resources. So we're going to go now to the energy wars, because the energy wars are related to the resource wars. Now, what's happening in the Middle East at the moment is that Russia and its allies and the US and its allies are fighting proxy wars in the Middle East. A proxy war is when you get somebody else to do your fighting for you. So that the two great powers, Russia, well, it's becoming a great power again, so that the major powers, let's put it that way, do not actually conflict with each other, but they conflict through their proxies. So that's what's happening in the Middle East. And one of the reasons why the conflict in the Middle East is going on, because the question is, who will supply the European gas market? There's gas in Russia, gas in the Middle East, and Russia at the moment has the primary responsibility for supplying Europe with gas. And gas is what Europe needs, because they don't have any of it of their own. So gas is important for Europe, and they need it. They need a supply, and the ones who have gas need to get it to Europe, because that's where the biggest market is. So what we have here is pipeline wars, supplying the gas to Europe. Let me show you. Up here, you have the Nord Stream gas pipe. That's recently been built by Russia. But you see, most of the pipelines go through Ukraine. Have you heard of Ukraine in the news recently? Yes. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Now, Russia wanted to avoid the Ukraine. They realize now that they have a problem with Ukraine, so they want to build a new pipelines to Europe. The Americans are trying to beat the Russians to it. They wanted to build this pipeline called the Nabucco gas pipeline, and you'll see that it avoids Russia. It goes through Turkey, and they were looking at gas supplies from Azerbaijan and even possibly from Iran. That's before Iran became a bad boy. But that pipeline failed, And one of the reasons was because they were a little uncertain about who was going to supply the gas. But now Russia has come up with one of their own. Now this is South Stream, and they want to build a pipeline from Russia through the Black Sea into Bulgaria and onward into the rest of Europe. But America wasn't happy with this pipeline, and they put pressure on the European powers to make it so difficult. They put so many restrictions upon this pipeline that virtually, if Russia agreed to these restrictions, that they would virtually lose control of their own pipeline, and it would fall into the hands of the EU members. So they said no thank you. They did initially have an agreement with these governments, but they said they made it so difficult that they said no thank you. And Putin did something quite amazing when it comes to the pipeline wars. He went directly to Turkey and he said to him, hey Mr. Erdogan, would you like some cheap gas? And so now the proposal is to build a pipeline through the Black Sea to Turkey and then onward to Europe. And they've basically agreed to do this. And there's a comment here from Pepe Escobar. He's a journalist who writes often on these matters, and he said, this Pipelinistan, he calls it, this Pipelinistan gambit, will continue to send massive geopolitical shockwaves all across Eurasia for quite some time. For the moment, let's appreciate the magnitude of the geopolitical shockwaves. There will be more when we least expect them. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, you've got to understand that Turkey is a crucial ally of America. It's part of NATO, and it's a very crucial country for America because it provides it with a platform close to Russia and to the Middle East. And so what Putin did when he went to Turkey and suggested this deal, he's pulling Turkey away from Russia and bringing it into his own orbit. And that is a very, very clever move on his part. You see, do you remember that book that Brzezinski wrote? He called it The Grand Chessboard. Well, this is how the players play the chess. And so Putin just made a wonderful move on the chessboard because it's now pulling Turkey away from America. But there are other players here too. Qatar. Qatar is full of gas, and they want to get their gas to Europe too. So they propose to build a pipeline from Qatar through Syria to the coast and transport it there from Syria to Europe. Now, this caused a ruckus because Syria rejected it, and this is why they rejected this pipeline. Syria's rationale for rejecting the Qatar proposal was said to be to protect the interests of its Russian ally, which is Europe's top supplier of natural gas. You see what's going on here? What America is trying to do, they're trying to stop the dependence that Europe has on Russian gas. So they're desperately trying to find other sources to supply Europe so that they can isolate Russia. This is how America operates. They try and isolate their enemies. So they take away the income that Russia would earn from the sale of gas to Europe, you see. So Syria is well aware of this. Now, Russia is Syria's major ally. So they said no to the pipeline to protect Russia's interests. It would have been in Syria's own interest, really, to actually have the pipeline built through their territory because it would give them a source of income. But they said no in the interests of their major sponsor. There is yet another pipeline proposal, this time to bring gas from Iran through Syria to Europe. But that one was basically rejected because the source of the gas was from Iran. Anyway, you see that these pipelines have a major impact on what is happening in the Middle East. After Syria said no to Qatar, the conflict in Syria started. And Qatar is one of the major sponsors of trying to get rid of President Assad, because he's the one who said no. All right, we've had the energy wars. Now we're going to look at the Wahhabi agenda. And this one's going to astound you, seriously. Now we're getting closer and closer to the truth of what's going on in the Middle East. So in order to understand the Wahhabi agenda, we have to go to this part of the world called Saudi Arabia. And it's a pretty impressive place. This is Mecca in Saudi Arabia. This is the holy city, the holy shrine for Muslims. And you can see there's a lot of building going on there. This is the Kaaba, the cube, which Muslims on their Hajj, they're required to go at least once on the Hajj, and they go to there and they're supposed to walk around that cube 7 times. Saudi Arabia was founded by the House of Saud, and there are some of the members there. They are the ruling dynasty, and they're like a feudal monarchy, very reactionary and very conservative. But they never would have come to power if it wasn't for this man, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, from where we get the word Wahhabi. And he's the founder of Wahhabism, which is a version of Islam, or they have their own sort of beliefs. You know that Christianity is splintered in many different directions. Well, so is Islam, and this is one of the splinters. But it's a very important splinter, because these people are quite ruthless when it comes to dealing with people who don't agree with them. This is what Wahhabism used to look like, and they were very aggressive, and they would attack their neighbors at a moment's notice, and they wouldn't take prisoners. They would kill everybody, and because they thought they were protecting the true beliefs of Islam, and anybody else who doesn't agree with them is in danger of being put to death. That's what Wahhabism is all about. This is what Wahhabism looks like today. Wahhabism is the core belief amongst all the jihadis, and this is why they are so dedicated, if you like, to their work. This is why they're not afraid of death, because they are fanatical believers in Wahhabism. All right? This is what Wahhabism also looks like today. ISIS, the people that are in the news so much recently for all their atrocities, they are Wahhabis. They are ruthless people who will exterminate anybody who doesn't agree with Wahhabism. This is what Wahhabism looks like for the women. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of these women. You often see them in Western countries, not dressed quite like that. This is the social policy of Wahhabism. This is an executioner showing us his sword that he used on his first day at work. The sword is very much a symbol of Wahhabism, and it's used extensively in the judicial system. And this is probably the most famous Wahhabi of all, and I'm sure you all know who he is. And I'm sure you also know that most of the people who were actively involved, or supposedly actively involved, in 9/11 were all from Saudi Arabia. But I don't think, maybe they were Wahhabis, but maybe not either. Anyway, the bulk of Islam, the bulk of Muslims around the world, they do not like the Wahhabis. May Allah protect us exposing Wahhabi and Salafi. Now, Salafi is simply another name for Wahhabism. Now, I don't want to go into why, but the average Muslim is not a Wahhabi, and they don't want anything to do with them, because they think of them as being fanatics and they are afraid of them. So here you see Muslims protesting about the Wahhabis. Look what this one here says. This one here says, no to Wahhabi and Takfiri extremism. Now, Takfiri is a word that Muslims use when they want to say that this person is not a real Muslim. A Takfiri is a person who claims to be Muslim, but the other Muslims don't recognize them as being Muslims and not true Muslims. So that's what that sign is saying there. Let me show you again. He says, no to Wahhabi and Takfiri extremism. They're saying that these people are not real Muslims. And over here it says, stop Wahhabi terrorism. And this one says, honk, if you do not like Wahhabism. So we can see that clearly here that not every Muslim supports what goes on in the Middle East. Not every Muslim supports the jihadis because they think they are extremists. Okay? That's a very important point to understand. Nevertheless, the jihadis are very active and they are basically in control. Now, this is because the Wahhabi mission in Saudi Arabia, you see, Saudi Arabia is actually exporting Wahhabism. They are promoting it. They consider it their mission as leaders to push Wahhabism upon the rest of the Muslim world and the world in general. It's a vital part of the Saudi Arabia identity. You see, we've talked about church and state, and you may think that's something that happens only in Western countries, but it's not the case. This is church and state Arab style. The Wahhabis and the Saudi Arabian government work together. There's a statement here which I'd like to read to you. Wahhabism and Saudi Arabia's ruling house of Saud have been intimately and permanently intertwined since their births. Wahhabism created the Saudi monarchy, and the house of Saud spread Wahhabism. One could not have existed without the other. Wahhabism gives the house of Saud legitimacy, and the house of Saud protects and promotes Wahhabism. The two are inseparable because each supports the other and depends on it for survival. So this is the vehicle that Saudi Arabia uses to export Wahhabism around the world. Whenever you see the Muslim World League, you know that that is supporting and promoting Wahhabism. You'll notice up here that there's even an office in London for the promotion of Wahhabism. And it's a very violent, it's a very evil form of Islam. So what this means is that Saudi Arabia is a fountainhead of terrorism. It's actually where the terrorists are strongest. It's where they get most of their funding from Saudi Arabia. And this is a fact which many people do not understand. Now, we've looked briefly before at how America has special arrangements with Saudi Arabia. It started way back just at the end of World War II when Roosevelt had a meeting with Stalin and Churchill in the city of Yalta in Russia. And on his way home, he was on a battleship. He stopped over to have a conference with the Saudi king, Ibn bin Saud, his name is. Roosevelt and Saud concluded a secret agreement in which the US would provide Saudi Arabia military security, military assistance, training, and a military base at Dhahran in Saudi Arabia in exchange for secure access to supplies of oil. Secret deal. That secret deal developed into the original arrangement became the petrodollar deal. So really what America is doing is it's shaking the hands of the devil, because these are the promoters of Wahhabism. So America's kingdom in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia, and they cannot help but get their fingers dirty because this is the country that promotes the jihadis, the people who cut people's heads off. Here is President Obama bowing down to the king of Wahhabism. This is a relationship that America will defend to the nth degree, because this is the basis of their dollar. You see, the value of the dollar is dependent on oil, and this is the country that basically runs the oil industry. So President Obama is bowing down to the king of Wahhabism. And this has been the way it has been all through the history of these two countries ever since the first agreement with President Roosevelt. Now, what this means is there's a huge conflict of interest here. Saudi Arabia is the most, how should I put it, feudal, backward, extortionate, extreme regime that the world probably has at the moment. And so what America is saying to the world is, we support the people of Libya, Syria, Tunisia, Egypt, Bahrain and Yemen as they rebel against their oppressive rulers, but not Saudi Arabia. Don't touch Saudi Arabia. That's the elephant in the room that nobody talks about. And America cannot help but be implicit in their activities which the Saudi Arabians are doing in the Middle East. You see, they're basically sticking the knife together into the Middle East, because America is protecting Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia is promoting terrorism. So that's one of the chief reasons why you have this confusion. You remember the letter we read about the confusion? People do not understand that America, because of its special relationship with Saudi Arabia, they can't really attack the Saudi Arabian terrorists. You understand? The ones that Saudi Arabia is spending money on. So, huge conflict of interest. Wahhabism and the US government, enemies in pretense, staunch allies in reality. And that's the fact of the matter, that's the facts on the ground in the Middle East. But it's not just Saudi Arabia. We also need to look at this little country called Qatar. Now, you may remember that Qatar got very upset when Syria declined to build a pipeline through their territory. So Qatar is a very, very wealthy country, hugely wealthy, very impressive. Look at the construction they have there. It's a billionaire's playground. And in Qatar, we have, again, yet another American base. It's called the WWIII Air Base, headquarters for US air operations in the region and the directing center of the air war in Syria and Iraq. Now here, not far away from the base, is the head mosque, the chief mosque of the country. It's in the capital city of Doha. That's also where the headquarters for Al Jazeera, the TV service, is. And I'd like to read you a statement here from the Washington Post. And this is what they say. Only 20 miles from the base, that's the base we just looked at, is the Grand Mosque in the Qatari capital Doha, which has served as a key outpost for Al-Qaeda. Huh? Yeah, Al-Qaeda. Linked rebels fighting the Syrian regime. The Post noted, including the Al-Nusra Front, the official Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, which was formerly part of ISIS until a split last year. Now, you have always understood, have you not, that Al-Qaeda is a great enemy that needs to be defeated. But here you have them being funded out of a mosque just 20 miles away from a US base, under the protection of Qatar, which is one of America's allies in the area. Don't you think that's a little odd? Just a little strange, maybe? Well, it gets even stranger. Here is General Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He tells the Senate Armed Services Committee that America's Arab allies are funding the group ISIS. He said that in September 16th last year. So America knows what's going on. They know that their allies are actually the ones who are behind ISIS, which America is supposedly supposed to be fighting. Very strange. Here is Joe Biden. He's giving a speech at the Harvard Kennedy School last year in October. He says, he just lays it out plain. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Saudis, the Emirates, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of tons of military weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad. Except the people who were being supplied were al-Nusra and al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. These are the Wahhabis. They're supporting the Wahhabis. Millions of billions of dollars and thousands of tons of military equipment. Of course, that was a bit of a slip-up. Biden apologises again for second Middle East blunder in 2 days. The Vice President says sorry to the United Arab Emirates for saying it supported al-Qaeda. Biden apologises to the Turkish president as well for his ISIS remarks. Did Biden apologise for telling the truth? Yes, he did. Joe Biden apologises for telling the truth about ISIS. That was a step too far, Joe. You mustn't, you're supposed to keep that information wrapped up. We don't want the people to know that we are indirectly supporting ISIS. The United States has conducted an escalating campaign of deadly airstrikes against the extremists of the Islamic State for more than a month, but that appears to have done little to tamp down the conspiracy theories still circulating from the streets of Baghdad to the highest levels of Iraqi government that the CIA is actually secretly behind the same extremists that it is now attacking. And there's reasons for that. This is Professor Francis Boyle. He's an American expert of international law. This is what he says. All the implications so far in the public record are that ISIS is a covert U.S. intelligence operation. The head of ISIS, Abu Bakr Baghdadi, spent 5 years in an American detention facility, and also 3 of the 4 military commanders were also in detention by the U.S. forces. So my guess is that ISIS is indeed a covert U.S. military intervention to set precedent for U.S. escalation in Iraq. Now, this is Cristina Fernández Kirchner, Argentinian president. She is very angry with America. She's especially angry with the people who control the finance. Do you remember we were talking about how the purpose of all this petrodollar money was flowing into the banks was to lend it out to other countries and get them into debt and to bankrupt them? Well, that's what happened to Argentina, and Argentina is still suffering from this and trying to rescue itself, and that's why she is angry. So she actually comes to the United Nations and she actually has something very revealing to reveal. She says this: today you pretend making a coalition against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. That used to be called, they keep changing the name. Sometimes they call it ISIL, sometimes they call it ISIS, sometimes they just call it IS. Let me read it again. Today you pretend making a coalition against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, but in fact you're their allies. And she's saying that to America. What we're going to do next is look at Agenda 6, reorganizing the Middle East, because this is also part of the agenda of the empire. The agenda is to totally reorganize the political landscape of the Middle East, and this is very much the strategy of all empires. It's the strategy of divide and conquer. So what you do is you break up the countries into smaller ones, and this is what was admitted recently in Congress in America. Iraq is no more. Pentagon coming to terms with 3-way split. This is the Joint Chief of Staff looking, that's Martin Dempsey. That Joint Chief of Staff means he's the head honcho for the military. He's looking on as Defense Secretary Ashton Carter testifies before the House Armed Services Committee, and that's what he said. We're coming to terms with Iraq being split up into 3 ways. Now, the reason they're doing this, or the way they're doing it, is what they're fanning the flames of the divide between the Sunnis and the Shiites. In the red there, you can see that here, the red, that's the main Shiite area of the Islamic world, and they are strongest in Iran and Iraq, and in Syria there's many Shiites. The ruling party, the ruling regime there is from a sect called the Alawites, and they are Shiites, and they are in power there. And the Sunnis, all these Wahhabis, all these, they are of the Sunni branch of Islam. So you have a religious war going on between, and the empire is fanning the flames of this religious war in order to break up the region. So let's just look at this map again in a bigger form. You see that Iraq here has disappeared. By the way, this is a map that the Pentagon published some years ago. They're just telling us what they want to do. You see, Iraq is broken up into a new country called Kurdistan there, and down here you have an Arab Shiite state, and over here you have a Sunni Iraq. So they've broken it up into its regional factions. Now and there's all sorts of changes going on over here. This is a brand new country here, free Baluchistan. Pakistan has lost a lot of territory. Turkey's lost some territory to Kurdistan. Jordan has been increased. There's a new country here. So you see, what they're doing is, if you can break up the region into smaller countries, you can get them in competition with one another, fighting against one another, especially if they have religious differences. And that's the plan. That's how you control a region. You break it up into smaller areas and make them fight against each other. Now, I want to share with you what this man said, Wesley Clark, 4-star general. He was the supreme Allied commander in Europe of NATO from 1997 to 2000. He was a very, very advanced man in the military. And he has an interview with Democracy Now! In March 2nd, 2007. Now, he's going to tell us what he found out when he went to the Pentagon. And remember, the Pentagon is the headquarters of the military in America. He went to the Pentagon just after 9/11. And while he was there, one of his colleagues said to him, "Hey, come in here. I have something amazing to show you." And I want to let Wesley Clark himself share with you what he discovered in the Pentagon just weeks after 9/11.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sorry, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran. But when you leave, the Saudis have got to find someone to fight the Shias. Who are they going to find? Al-Qaeda. Because the groups of Sunnis who would be extremists and willing to fight would probably be the groups connected to Al-Qaeda. So one of the weird inconsistencies in this is that were we to get out early, we'd be intensifying the threat against us of a super powerful Sunni extremist group, which was now legitimated by overt Saudi funding in an effort to hang on to a toehold inside Iraq and block Iranian expansionism.
So, we have heard what Clark found out in the Pentagon, and it's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing, because what he says is that they already had pre-planned before 9/11. They had a plan in place how they were going to go into all these different countries and take them over. And so you can see that there is another agenda here. This plan was in place before 9/11, and there is another agenda, and it's an unspoken agenda, and it's a hidden agenda, and that's what we're going to talk about next time. The final agenda. What is it? Before we go, God is in control again. Don't forget. I want to read the end of Psalm 91 for you. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore I will deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation.